So one of the activities I usually would like to do in this lecture, if we were all in the room together, would be to spend 10 or 15 minutes where you guys get into groups and you define a novel species, or you design a novel species to fill in gaps in the data. But you have to keep in mind the trade-offs, right? So why aren't there any species out where this letter B is, or out where this letter C is, or in the middle, right? So there's these different species that seem to be relatively rare. And, we would try to think about, so what I want you to do is sort of describe the traits of these species and why you think they might be less common than some of the other traded species where these red bits are. And then we would spend 10 minutes sort of ignoring the trade-offs and designing the weirdest species we could think of and whether or not such a species could exist. I can't think of a good way of doing this without having a big discussion board or something like that. So maybe I'll create a discussion board for this if you want to, and I'll try to check in and see and engage in the discussion, but that one won't be graded. It could just be for the students that are trying to practice. It's not impossible that I might give you something like this on an exam as a test question. And so since we can't really do that activity, let's think about a couple unusual plant, right? So tree ferns are on here, right? They're woody plants, but they're not very tall, and they have spores, not seeds. So they're a little bit weird, right? In that they're sort of on here, but they don't really fit, right? They have traits over here, and they have traits over here. So those are pretty weird. Seed ferns existed for a while, but as far as we know, they're all extinct, right? So they have relatively small leaf area, but they're maybe over here with these traits. So that's a bit unusual. You could think about what would this graph look like if seed ferns still existed. If we could go back in time and redo this analysis, we would probably find a completely different set of correlations over time, right? So one thing that they point out in their paper is that you've got ferns over here and gymnosperms over here, and then all the angiosperms are up here. So it might be worth thinking about, if we went back in time to, the evolution of mosses in the Ordovician and all that different stuff, that maybe some of this would have been shifted down, but maybe some of these correlations would be completely different for different sets of plants. Yeah, it might have been shifted downwards, right? In a world where we had a lot of mosses and ferns and conifers. Feel free to go over to that discussion board. It's not going to be worth any points, but think about what, if you could pick a point off here and describe that species, or if you could think of the weirdest species that you've ever seen and where it would fit on this graph. Like, where would a cactus go on here? I don't know. Another thing that I want to highlight here is that there's no roots on here, right? So you might want to think about, are these 6 traits all that we need, right? Would we want to put anything about roots on here? There's also nothing about resource foraging or the gathering of resources. Remember Elton's niche? I mean, it's sort of here with the nitrogen, but maybe photosynthetic rates should go on here. Maybe stomatal traits that Mike's really interested in should go on here. So think a bit about what's missing from here as well, right? Okay, so review. What are the 3 niche concepts we discussed? You should know all 3, even though I think the Hutchinsonian one is the best. Why do functional traits allow for niche comparisons among species in a better way than thinking of the n-dimensional hypervolume? What are those types of trade-offs we talked about, and maybe some examples of each, and be able to read a trait ordination and design a plant based on the location of the trait ordination. We spent a fair bit of time on that, and feel free to ask me questions about that. Good, so that's that. And I'm sorry we couldn't do that exercise. I feel like students have a lot of fun designing weird plants, but feel free to do it on the discussion board.